you're traveling up Los Feliz Boulevard, you may notice a statue of a 19th century looking man there at the intersection near Crystal Springs Drive. That statue is Griffith Jenkins Griffith. The first thing I found out when I Googled him was that he shot his wife in the face. So today, we're talking about the very complex life of Griffith Park's namesake with Karina Wilson, a polymath who's a writer and historian with a particular interest in true crime and horror films, who's lived in the 90028 for 20 years. Welcome, Karina.
Hi, it's great to be here.
I am so thrilled because you have a whole bunch of information about this very interesting man. And can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you kind of came into studying this stuff?
Well, I've always had an interest in history. The longer you live in Los Angeles, the more you realize is there. It's an absolutely fascinating place, and it's a kind of living embodiment of late stage capitalism, the way it kind of came to be. And really, nobody should be living here at all. I think that the people who come to LA, not just in the film and TV industry, that, you know, it's always been a place that's drawn dreamers, gurus, visionaries of one sort or another who came here and thought, this is the place where I can realize my dream. And the longer that you live here, the more aware of the ghosts you become. And really, Griffith Jenkins Griffith is absolutely germane to all of that. And also his story is a very Los Angeles story in that it's about somebody who had a big dream and really, really destroyed his own life. It's a rags to riches, to prison, to desperately trying to regain his former status.
You've said so many things that are utterly fascinating, and I want to comment on about 15,000 of them. But you said this is a city that people should not live in. And we are experiencing that right now with these wildfires. So how are you faring?
It's been very scary. You know, I've lived all over the world. I like to think of myself as a calm, capable person. But when that evacuation zone came within a couple of blocks, and I was stood there, I don't have a car, I have 3 cats. I was like, oh, it was very real. I figured it out because I have amazing friends, but it was a lot. And I would hate to have been, you know, somebody who uses a wheelchair or somebody who has children. You know, it's been a really, you know, awful moment, I think, for a lot of Angelenos. And those are just the ones who faced evacuation. And then there are people who've lost their homes, their livelihoods. You know, it's a major crisis.
And it's not over. We're going to be on alert until we get a rain, basically. And that might not happen till February. And so let's talk about Griffith Jenkins Griffith. But before we get into his story, I want to talk a little bit about his wife, Tina Mesmer Griffith. She's the woman that he shot. What do we know about her?
Well, she came from, you know, the Los Angeles aristocracy. So back in the, you know, we're talking the sort of 1870s, 1880s, land was the main currency in Los Angeles. Before the railroad came, it was a ranch. You know, the bigger the land holdings you had, the more important your family were. She came from I believe, French Catholic family, and she was very well educated. She played the piano beautifully. She loved her flower arrangements. She was groomed as a kind of sophisticated European young woman would have been, which was a real expression of privilege, because LA in those days was 10 years removed from being a really rough frontier town.
And was it like the Wild West?
It was Wild West, because if you think that the things that drew people here were originally gold, they were still discovering gold in the surrounding areas and other minerals till quite late in the 19th century. And then there was oil, and then there was the farming, and farmers don't tend to be very sophisticated people because they spend all their time tending their fields and their livestock. And there was also the people who had made fortunes on the frontier in whatever way. And so now we look back and we go, oh, well, genocide and environmental destruction, yay, you made millions of dollars. And they came here and brought those frontier attitudes. And people would make their fortune and lose their fortune, and they'd create a frontier town with everything that implied. Those kind of speculators, and Griffith as well, he was into mining in his early career. And also a lot of kind of dodgy dealing as well. Like he wasn't always straight with the people who bought shares in his mines. There's implications of fraud going on. They brought their big pots of money that they'd made through nefarious means. Some industrialists came here and they'd made money off the back of human exploitation in their factories, belching black smoke back east. And they came to this pristine valley and went, oh, this is pretty. Let's build a house here. Let's build a mansion that reminds us of sophisticated mansions in Europe, and pretend like our whole careers exploiting and sometimes killing didn't happen. And we're going to be here, and there's going to be flowers and butterflies and sunshine and dry cocktail parties, because a lot of them were temperate. That's LA.
Tina is raised as kind of the sophisticated offspring of wealthy people.
Yeah, I mean, she had a lot of money. In her own right, at the age of 22, she owned $1 million worth of land, 1880s values, which would be possibly like 30 million now.
Huge money.
Huge money.
And so when I asked the question, why did Griffith want to marry her?
Well, it was the money, it was the cachet. Even in a town of people with dodgy histories and perhaps rough manners, Griffith never quite made the impact on society that he hoped to. People, the leading families looked down on him. He wasn't quite good enough. But marrying Mary Agnes Christina Mesmer, who was just this, paragon of Los Angeles society, that gave him the kind of credibility he needed, as well as the cash to buy any kind of membership that he wanted.
But at one point, the wedding, the engagement gets broken off. What happened there?
Yeah, I mean, this all comes out later, after the incident, which we'll talk about in more detail. But I think it was about 10 days before they were due to get married, Griffith realized that it wasn't that his wife had money, or Tina had money, but it was a little bit more complicated than they thought it was. An uncle, Andre Briswold, had left her and her sister a huge tract of land. And Griffith had been under the illusion that it had just been left to Tina. And he found out 10 days before the wedding. He was like, this isn't quite the package I thought I was getting. So he threatened to break off the engagement. And for this high-profile Catholic family, that was social death, because Tina would have been tainted goods at that point. Nobody would have married her. The gossip about the family would have been more than they could bear. So they said, well, okay, please don't break it off. Please don't break it off. And what can we do? And there was a lot of double dealing. And basically Griffith managed to disinherit Tina's sister and have all the money go to her, and then immediately to him.
Wow. So this tells us a lot of what Griffith is like as a person.
Yeah.
He's very much only about him getting his money. Why is he like that? What can you tell us about his early life?
He's a hustler. Like he's born in Wales to a very, very poor family and in Wales. And at the age of 16, he gets the opportunity, as so many did, to cross the Atlantic and go live with an uncle in Pennsylvania. And it was a better life than scrabbling for an existence on a Welsh hillside.
It seemed like he was kind of poor in Wales, wasn't he?
Absolutely. I mean, he was one of several children. They were a poor farming family. And in the mid-19th century, to be a poor farming family, it's a subsistence existence.
Yeah.
If you think of all the people who emigrated to the USA from Europe in the 19th century were leaving pretty similar conditions behind, whether they were coming from Ireland or Greece or Czechoslovakia. They're leaving extreme poverty where they have very little in the way of hope of bettering their situation and coming to this land where they can, in theory, make all the money in the world. The streets are paved with gold. That's the kind of Ellis Island promise. And Griffith was one of those people. He's a teenage boy. He doesn't have any family ties. He gets on that ship and sails across the Atlantic, which was not a pleasant journey.
Yeah.
Even in the 1860s. And he arrives just around the end of the Civil War. He rises, he actually trains as a journalist. He does a lot of odd jobs, cabinet maker, and he ends up in San Francisco, where he uses his skill as a journalist to write prospectuses for mining. And that's where some of the accusations of fraud later on come in, that he would write up a mine as being more potentially profitable than it was, but he would be in cahoots with the owners. So people would buy shares, and then Griffith and the owners would disappear quietly, while the new owners of the mine would go, oh, actually, this claim is a lot smaller than you said it was in the prospectus. That wasn't all of them. Like, he did actually, when he arrived in LA, he did have mining money. And he had enough money to buy the Rancho Los Feliz, which is a lot. Which is it was a big ranch, and he fancied himself as another landed gentry, owning and being a farmer and having cattle and, you know, all of that cattle and crops. And it just didn't work out.
Now, there is a theory that Los Feliz is cursed. Do you know that story? Do you have?
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion about this, that the curse may be a kind of retcon curse, that actually there's a story spread about Griffith kind of after the fact, because there are no real contemporaneous records. People love to tell ghost stories and then kind of extrapolate back as to why the ghost was there. But the story of the curse is that, again, it's about inheritance, which was obviously when you've got land as your main kind of source of wealth in an area, who gets your land when you die is crucially important. So I think his name, was it Don Antonio? Don Antonio
has a niece. Yeah.
He's the original owner. He has a niece.
And he's dying of smallpox, right?
Yeah, Petronilla. And she stands to inherit. And sometimes the story is that she's blind, which makes her a little bit more kind of like mystical and pathetic.
Yeah.
And a couple of lawyers, a couple of rivals show up with some lawyers, and they make him rewrite his will. And again, one version of the story says that he was so weak and dying of smallpox that they actually kind of propped him up with a stick and took his hand and made him sign, and I read his signature.
I read one where they made a stick nod his head that he was consenting to.
Yeah, I mean, bad things were done, and so Donna Petronilla was completely disinherited. She was pissed, and she cursed the land and anybody who owned it to an early death, and she blighted it, in classic biblical style.
Well, your cows will die, your crops won't grow, right? You will die a terrible death. And this land will never make any money. Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. It was pretty all encompassing. And then she drops dead immediately after saying the curse out loud, which I think is, that if you're going to curse somebody and put your whole chest into it, then that's definitely the way to go. But nobody knows really if this is true or not, or if it was just a story kind of made up to kind of explain why. But it is true that subsequent owners of the Los Feliz Ranch did not live lucky lives. Like, a number of them died. Their cattle died. There were floods. There were diseases. They had financial losses, and a lot of them died of kind of violent ends. And then Griffith apparently would only go to the ranch during daylight because he thought that there were ghosts, and it was the ghosts of Donna Petronilla and Don Antonio kind of rampaging around, shaking their spectral fists at the new owners of the property. So yeah, it was supposedly cursed. It was a very valuable piece of land, and this is jumping forward a little bit, because it abutted the Los Angeles River, and the history of Los Angeles is the history of water rights. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, it was very valuable. And if you think of the area that Griffith Park is now, there's especially at the foot of the hills, there is some land that you could foresee being used as grazing. There's good hunting if you want deer in the hills.
And for someone who's not familiar with the area and the neighborhood, can you kind of describe describe where Los Feliz is and where Griffith Park is?
If you think of the Hollywood Hills as the sort of big mountainous area in the center of central LA, that's the Hollywood Hills, what divides Los Angeles from the valley. And Griffith Park and Los Feliz is at the eastern end of that. So we're talking east and northeast of Hollywood proper. And you have these beautiful kind of Californian hills, but they're actually kind of quite craggy. There's a lot of very sort of steep canyons. Fires go through a lot. It would be quite difficult to build houses up there, although over a century, people have had a really good go at putting houses on stilts and wedging them into the hillside.
Yes.
And Los Feliz itself is 90027, that zip code. The lower part of the ranch did actually, over the next sort of 50 years, sell quite successfully for houses. And there's a lot of really nice 1920s, 1930s Adobe Spanish style houses, a lot of really lovely apartment buildings. It's a nice area to be in. It's low rise. Once you get past the steep part of the hill, it all gently slopes down towards Sunset Boulevard, which is our big kind of intersecting.
And lots of big trees along the a very shady area, and there's some extremely wealthy houses, and then there's just kind of
to the north. Angelina Jolie lives in the old Cecil B. DeMille estate, which is Los Feliz. There was a big scandal about Katy Perry and the former convent, which is kind of at the other end. The La Bianca house, Bianca house.
I lived right behind the La Bianca house.
Yeah.
And so that was where the second Manson murders were.
And then there's the infamous Los Feliz murder house, which again, is a whole story. And it all abuts Griffith Park. And so wherever you live in Los Feliz, you can walk up into the park. There's various entrances. And it's this, incredible wilderness. It's very beautiful. It's very wild. I mean, there's rattlesnakes and mountain lions
and coyotes.
And there are some secret paths that you would have to torture me to get the location of, but you can go and you're in the middle of Los Angeles and there's nobody around,
Yeah.
Unless there's somebody lurking in the bushes. It has an incredible history. After it became a park, it was a safe space for LGBTQ people.
Yes.
Throughout the middle of the 20th century into the late 20th century, and they had picnics in the parks where you picnic in the park. We could actually go and be with your partner openly, which is a big deal in 1970, which is also the year of gay pride. And then you have there's golf courses, there's the old zoo, there's sort of the merry-go-round and the pony ride areas. There you could go horse riding. There's boys camp up there. On the north side, there's an area where they actually do kind of industrial level composting. So you can go get big parts of compost. And there's all kinds of,
And the observatory.
Obviously, in the observatory, which we'll get to. And then to the western end, there's the Hollywood sign.
So Griffith Jenkins Griffith buys this piece of land. And what does he do with it?
Well, he starts out trying to farm, but he's not, farming is a skill. And he's a miner by this point, miner, miner. And it doesn't do terribly well. He tries to sell it, but he's on the wrong side of the property boom. And because so much of it is sort of steep and scrubby, people want the tracts on flatter land. So he doesn't have a lot of success doing that. So he's kind of stuck with this giant ranch that he bought in a hurry that isn't he's not able to use it. And then one of my favorite stories, and there's actually going to be a Substack post later this week, is about the ostrich farm. So he leased several hundred acres to a consortium to create an ostrich farm. Now, ostrich consortium is the funniest. It sounds like the craziest thing in the world, but there was actually a kind of precedent because they realized, all these people who bought land in Southern California, obviously the thing to do is to try and build houses, but you can't just build houses on land. You have to have stuff for people to do and kind of activities. as I said, they don't want to, build factories and, do anything dirty or polluting. So some bright spark latched onto the idea of importing ostriches. And ostriches in South Africa are used to the same kind of climate as we have here in the Los Angeles basin. And so getting them here was kind of a problem. I think the original shipment was 178 and only 22 survived.
Oh, no.
They came from Cape Town to New Orleans by boat on a ship and then on a train here. And as you can imagine, that's not natural ostrich habitat. But once they had breeding stock here, they thrived. And why would you want to farm ostriches, you ask? It's because of the feathers. And if you think of all the beautiful hats that women wore and the fans that they used during that time, they all require ostrich feathers.
And I read that Griffith Jenkins Griffith started an anti-feather organization, like animal rights organization, with his colleagues because they're like, don't kill birds by using their feathers. And then people would only use ostrich feathers because the ostriches drop their feathers naturally. You don't have to pluck them out.
Oh, but you do. That's the thing.
Oh, you do. Oh, no.
And so that the whole which again is a little bit of a sidebar, but if you put a bag over the ostrich's head, they go very quiet, and then you can take as many feathers. But they do molt and regrow them. It's not like plucking a turkey or whatever.
Okay.
You can take feathers, and I think at the time feathers sold for $5 a piece.
Oh,
so it was if you had a lot of ostriches, you were making. But anyway, I go into I found some great stuff about the economics of ostrich farming, and it seemed like a really good business proposition.
But they also had like little carts that the ostriches would pull, and you could ride.
Yes,
them. And they also had zebras there too.
The ostrich farm is it's a kind of a prototype amusement park. So they have this area of land where the old zoo now is in Griffith Park, if you know the area, and they built a clubhouse there, and I write down what it was stocked with because it was such a lovely description. It was stocked with liquors, wines, cigars, and eatables, which is they wanted people to go up, have a meal, relax, look at a range of exotic animals. They had monkeys and zebras and all kinds of things, as well as the ostriches. You could ride around in the ostrich carts and just generally hang out. And, one theory is that this is the prototype of the great Californian amusement park. And so this consortium, which is Elizabeth Lava, the kind of ostrich guru, a guy called CJ Sketchley, Dr. CJ Sketchley, who's the ostrich expert, Frank Burnett and Granville P. Beecham, and a guy called Randolph H. Tracy are the ones who set all this up. Now, Randolph H. Tracy is a real character, and he is the one who's in charge of the kind of the clubhouse, the bar, restaurant. But very quickly, he starts having very obvious sexual relationships, a very obvious sexual relationship with one of the servants. Ooh. Who was very unfortunately, and her true identity has been kind of lost to history because all we know of her is a very disparaging article in the LA Times, which just refers to her as the Madrasi Govinda. So she comes from South India, and she's described as, they're very rude about her. It's the kind of intersection of racism and misogyny, that she's uncomely. The description is she is as homely as a mud fence, which is just awful. I mean, Los Angeles was home to it's always been home to a diverse population. But the fact that she is the one kind of blamed for the downfall because she was Indian from South India, it just seems really unfair when Randolph, or Randy, as I'm sure he was known by, is the whole power dynamic. It was probably a coercive relationship because she's the servant. Yeah. And so the Randolph is running around with her, and then she leaves, and then he brings a husband and wife, Mr. and Mrs. Edward Bidwell from the UK, and he starts running around with Mrs. Bidwell. And
oh no.
all the employees know about it and they gossip about it, and the gossip gets into town, and people say to, nice people say to each other, well, you shouldn't go to the ostrich farm because all kinds of, and at the time it's criminal sexual activity because California has these horrific miscegenation laws that come in 1880. And so the ostrich farm, which had been doing okay, it dies.
Oh, wow.
Because of this guy, Randolph Stracy, and the other members of his consortium actually have to take him to court. And, there's a petition filed which lists basically he's a drunkard. Yeah. He's having sex and not caring who hears it. He's lazy. He's off hunting when he should be looking after the animals. He seems like a real bad egg.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened to him. He pops up in 1899 having a big fight with the city over water rights. But he seems to have been a real character.
And someone else who is a real character, part of the Ostrich consortium, is Frank Burkett, who had a big altercation with...
So the crumbling of the consortium is it's annoying for Griffith because they built a railway, or they were hoping to build a railway from downtown to Los Feliz to ferry people backwards and forwards from the ostrich farm.
And Griffith, about what year was that?
So this is the late. I think they announced it in about 1886.
Oh wow! Okay.
And they're still trying to do it. The ostrich farm goes under in 1889, and Frank Burnett is part of that original. Frank Burkett is part of that original consortium, and he has built a house on part of the land and put up fences, and he spent $3,000 on a house, which is that's a big fancy house at that point, but he doesn't own it. And the ostrich farm, which was going to make everybody so much money, is no longer there. Sketchley takes his birds and goes elsewhere. Oh, wow. There are several other ostrich farms set up in the area. I think by 1910, there's several around, and a lot of them are descended from Sketchley's birds. But Frank Burkett is kind of left on the land with his house, and he's not paying rent. And Griffith gets more and more annoyed with him. And this goes on for about 5 years until the house mysteriously burns down just as Griffith is about to, I guess, step in and foreclose and get his land back, with the added bonus of this very fancy house. It burns down. And Griffith
Do you think it was someone burning that house down, or do you think
I mean, nothing changes in Los Angeles. It's still a go-to tactic of shady developers to burn properties down to make sure that nobody else gets their hands on them. It's something that gets dealt with. That's still a problem for preservationists. Anyway, Burkett brings lawsuits against Griffith, and he brings a couple, but he loses, and he's desperate and destitute, Burkett, which is not a good combination. And so the story goes, this is 1891 now. It's October the 28th, 1891. Griffith's mother-in-law dies about a month earlier, so they're at the cemetery on Buena Vista Street visiting. He and Tina are visiting, and Burkett storms up to them in a buggy and shoots Griffith twice. Oh, don't forget, this is 1891, so mourning and all the ceremonies to do with mourning are taken very seriously. Yeah. So Burkett storms up, yells at Griffith, shoots him, and then storms off, realizes what he's done, and shoots himself in the head. He misses Griffith, he doesn't miss himself. And so there are a lot of witnesses. It's in the middle of the day. It's another huge scandal relating to Griffith. And talk about a curse not being a curse. The really telling detail is that when the police investigated Burkett's bag, they found that he'd used a double-barreled shotgun and he put the wrong shot into the gun. So he'd shot with what they call small shot, which you'd use for small birds or small animals, which isn't particularly powerful. He put 2 cartridges and shot those, and he had the buckshot cartridges, which would take down a deer and would obviously take down a human being, still in the satchel. He'd messed it up.
Oh, wow.
So Griffith got really lucky that day.
Yes. And
really lucky.
And he lives on to cause havoc for his poor wife. So why did Griffith then go on calling himself Colonel Griffith?
Again, context.
Yeah.
There were a lot of people who did legitimately get honours during the Civil War. And I think he just wanted to up himself into that sort of level of society. So he started calling himself Colonel, which was, it was an affectation. I don't think anybody particularly believed it, but he liked Colonel Griffith J. Griffith. There's no evidence that he ever had any military service in his background.
I heard that people kind of made fun of his affectation by calling him the Prince of Wales. Is that true?
Yes. Wales spelled Whales. He was quite stout. And he liked to stomp around with a cane, and those, fancy brass or gold tipped canes. And, he was quite pompous. He liked public speaking. He had an ego. Like a lot of these frontier men who made a lot of money, like rich people do today. Let's say that, I think, that type who think that their money is some kind of testament to their character, but also we're smack bang in the 1890s robber baron era, the quote unquote Gilded Age, where this new United States of America is doing gangbusters on creating very wealthy people. And so he's existing within that context. So anything he can do to puff himself up, he does, because that's just who he is. He has all this land. He doesn't quite know what to do with it. It's not particularly profitable. And he started to get quite a lot of back taxes owing on it. And as anybody who lives and owns property in Los Angeles will tell you, property taxes intense. And so he does a deal with the city where he gives the city, and again with a lot of pomposity, he marches up to City Hall with a scroll and an entourage, and he does this whole deal. And he gives the city a park. And some of that is to do with the great city parks that he saw on his honeymoon in 1887. But some of it is that he kind of sees the way the city's going, with everybody scrabbling over tracts of land and building everything up. And I always, this is the great paradox I'm exploring in these articles, is people came here and went, gosh, look at all this incredibly beautiful valley with this golden light and these beautiful trees. Let's build houses and roads and railways and destroy everything that we thought beautiful. Whereas Griffith, actually, he's like, no. And we're framing him as a wrong un, but I think he did have a soul. I think on a kind of philosophical level, he was a romantic with a capital R, but he's living in the era, the 1890s, of course, of the decadence. And the decadents believe in the primacy of artificial and man-made, and I say man-made, not human-made, deliberately man-made over nature. Whereas Griffith was a Emerson or a Wordsworth at heart, I think. And he said, well, there's this land is beautiful. Let's kind of keep it that way. So he attached quite a lot of preservation orders on the land, which still stand today. Like, it can't be developed. It can't be built on. You can't have any railway line where the fare is more than a nickel, I think.
Oh, wow.
He put a lot of restrictions on it so it would remain pristine wilderness, because he believed, he genuinely believed that the city needed that there needed to be some brakes put on development. So that was in 1896. And of course, that kind of gave him the keys to the city, because there's this incredible gift of thousands of acres of land. I think at that point it was just over 3,000. And over the years, the city negotiated it up to 4,000. But it was an incredible gift. And he got to be called a founding father of the city, and all the things that his little Welsh heart had always desired. And again, it's the be careful what you wish for. It wasn't enough. It wasn't enough, because he actually started to develop a pretty horrendous drinking problem during the late 1890s, early 1900s. By his own account, was drinking a pint to a pint and a half of whiskey a day, quote unquote, mixed with champagne. And that's a lot. And he was a private drunk. He was sneaking around to do this. because there was quite a mood of temperance in Los Angeles at the time, and it wasn't the public thing, the done thing to get drunk in public. So he's drinking at home privately, getting nips from his flask. And if you're drinking a pint and a half of whiskey a day, you're drunk all day. And if you're drunk all day, you become very paranoid. If you're paranoid and you're a Protestant and you're married to a devout Catholic wife, you're going to have arguments about religion, which was one of the big problems between them. And the drunkenness and the general aggression and paranoia meant that divorce was often discussed between them. And a divorce would have shattered Griffith's reputation and also his finances. So
I was also thinking, was Tina disinclined to divorce because she's a Catholic?
She was very disinclined to divorce, but don't forget she had a protective, important family. If she had been able to divorce Griff, she could have gone back to her family. And then at that stage in her life, they had one child, Vandal, and she would have taken her child, got custody of her child, and gone back to her family. And it wouldn't have been great, but it was probably better than staying with a drunk who accused her of trying to poison him, in cahoots with the Pope.
Yes, I read that. He believed that his wife and the Pope were trying to poison him. And I'm sure there was probably stories in the press of women poisoning their husbands. Yeah.
I mean, also, if you're drinking a lot of whiskey, that's awful on your stomach. You're going to have all these, horrific kind of like stomach pains. It's going to affect your digestive system. And, most alcoholics are deep in denial. So he's like, it's not the pint and a half of whiskey a day. My wife's trying to poison me. If he's got blood coming out of either end, he's not going to blame the alcohol addiction. He's going to look for something outside himself. And it was, unfortunately, his wife. In, I think, August 1903, we have a new Pope, Pope Pius X.
Oh.
And Griff latched on to this new Pope as being somebody who his wife was in communication with, and they were plotting together to kill him. I mean, that's just a sort of indication of his pomposity and his grandiosity, is that he thought he was important enough for the Pope to want to kill him.
Or the Pope to even know who he is. And I've had dealings with alcoholic people before, and they don't make sense. Their brains are not working. They think things that are just off the rails.
It's very sad. And they went out to Tina and their son, Vandal, and Griff went out to Santa Monica. And in those days, Santa Monica was kind of 17 miles away. And that was enough that, you went to a hotel and you stayed in Santa Monica. It wasn't a day trip like it is today. It was a journey and a destination.
And they stayed at the Arcadia Hotel, which has a whole history there, the Arcadia Hotel, which isn't there anymore, but beautiful hotel that was kind of like in the northern beach of Santa Monica.
I don't know, but I know so many of the beautiful Los Angeles hotels that have been lost to us.
Yes. Yeah.
So they stay in the hotel. They have this kind of seaside holiday in which it's pretty daily haranguing from Griff to poor Tina, like, why are you trying to kill me? What's going on? And it all culminates on, I think, the 4th of September 1903, where they're in the room together and they're actually she's packing because they're due to leave the next day. And he asks her to get on her knees, and he brings her a Bible or a prayer book, and he asks her to swear that she is not trying to poison him, and he has a gun. And she's like, you can imagine the scene where she's just like, you stop accusing me of doing this. I'm not poisoning you. You're sick. You need to get help. And he fires the gun and he shoots her from about 2 feet away.
In the eye.
And again, we talk about the luck of the Griffiths. Like, he narrowly escaped death by a bullet in 1891. And now he shoots his wife at 2 feet. It's pretty much point blank range. And the bullet somehow splits apart, and it goes partly through, it kind of glances off the front, because the front of your skull is pretty tough. Glances off. A part of it goes through her eye. She loses her eye, and she stumbles backwards out of the hotel window and falls down onto an awning.
And isn't it third floor? She fell off the third story onto an awning?
Onto an awning. And then she managed to scramble, with having just been shot and lost an eye, manages to scramble into the room below. And the hotel manager happens to be in there. And he kind of saves her, and Griff comes down and he's kind of like, and he's outrageous at this point. Like she gets taken off to hospital, but she doesn't speak to anybody, and he starts telling people it was a suicide attempt gone wrong.
Oh, what a dickhead.
Because he thinks that she's going to die.
Yeah.
And he's saying, I tried to get the gun off her, but she shot herself.
Man, these guys.
Yeah. Tina survives,
which is amazing.
That's just incredible that she survives. She's permanent. She's horribly disfigured. Like I said,
and
she's
blinded.
She's blinded. The first thing she does is 6 days later, she serves him with divorce papers.
Good for her.
And that goes through. And in between them, there's the trial. And the trial, which takes place in early 1904, is really, as you can imagine, all the evidence every day is breathlessly reported in the papers. And the big kind of centerpiece of the trial is Tina herself takes the stand, but she's wearing a black veil.
Was she watching the trial too the whole time?
But when she takes the stand and she goes through, and it's basically, it's a kind of a done deal at that point that he's going to be found guilty. His defense, however, is insanity. And it's insanity down to chronic alcohol addiction.
Oh, finally he admits that he has a problem.
If you read some of the case documents, there's an implication that there's a sort of sexual element to chronic alcohol. Actually, the defense is chronic alcohol insanity, that he was so sozzled, he was lustful, he was impetuous, he didn't know what he was doing. And the jury actually buys it to a certain extent. He's found guilty of assault with a deadly weapon, but he's sentenced to just 2 years.
2 years. He shoots his wife at point blank range and he gets 2 years. Oh,
2 years.
If it was a woman, they would have hung her, right?
Yeah. In an era when, he could easily have been executed for this, this is where his status and his money do, I think, play a part, that he's found, and the fact that she doesn't die, so they can't charge him with murder. So it's assault with a deadly weapon. He gets 2 years. He comes out and he tries, obviously the divorce goes through. There's a big divorce battle, and she manages to get some of her wealth back, not all of it, but he's still a very rich man when he comes out of jail. And he spends the rest of his life trying to, redress the balance. He tries to leave a great legacy. So he really gets on the case with the city about what they're going to do with the park. He's a bit annoyed with them when he gets out of jail because they haven't done anything. It's just been left. And so there are people illegally grazing their cattle, stealing wood, doing all kinds of stuff up there. So he kind of forces the city to build a few roads and kind of organize the park into areas. And he also wants them to build a theatre, an open air amphitheatre and observatory. But they say no, they don't want his money. They don't want the scandal. He's tainted. So he spends, he dies in 1919, and he spends, I guess he gets out of jail in about 1906, 07. He spends the last 13, 14 years of his life kind of campaigning. He writes a really good book in about 1910 about the benefits of parks to the psyche and to people and to cities. And he does have a certain amount of vision as a city planner, but the guy shot his wife in the face.
Yeah, they're like, we don't want your observatory and your theater.
And then when he dies in 1919, he leaves a massive amount of money in a trust to build the observatory and what we now know as the Greek theatre. And the city go, all right, now he's dead.
Yeah,
we'll take the money and we'll do that. And so we have the Griffith Observatory. And he wanted all Angelenos to have access to the park, but he also built the observatory because he felt they all deserved access to the stars. which I think is kind of lovely. Yeah.
But it is interesting that in the 90s, then the statue gets put up at the corner of Crystal Springs and Los Feliz Boulevard of Griffith Jenkins Griffith, this man who shot his wife in the face, and that's an interesting choice. I wonder, I don't know the history about who made that decision. A plaque would have been good. A statue is a whole different thing than a plaque.
Yeah. Well, I hate to say it's metal, so it probably won't last very long.
There you go.
given not that I want to give anyone ideas, but given that, the plundering of the city's plaques and metal artifacts that's going on right now, I don't know if the Griffith Griffith statue is completely safe. But it's that whole, it's like, if you're going to be a philanthropist, be a good person as well. Yes. I think is the lesson from all of this. Like, his minor misdemeanors would probably have been forgotten. But the fact that he shot his wife in the face it's the first thing on Google.
Yes.
And 100 years before the invention of the internet, it's he wasn't to know, but that's his legacy.
Yeah, I think if any statue should be there, it should be maybe a Native American statue of Toy Perina or one of the many women that have been part of Los Angeles history.
Ida Hancock would be a great person to celebrate with a statue, but we barely know anything about her.
Oh, and who is Ida Hancock?
So Hancock Park, that whole area was her landholding. She was a widow for most of her life, and she actually dug tar out of the tar pits herself.
Oh, wow.
And made a fortune doing that, but was also an incredible philanthropist.
Wow, Hancock Park is beautiful. That whole very, very wealthy area in Los Angeles, kind of south of Hollywood. And so what happened to Tina after Griff died?
She lives in seclusion with her sister. She doesn't want anybody to see her. And she lives till 1948. So she does outlive her ex-husband by almost 30 years. But I don't think she was very happy. She has her son. He grows up to be quite a good custodian of the Griffith legacy and sort of shepherds through the building of the observatory and, making the park into the monument that it is today. But I think that in those days, any kind of facial disfigurement really set you apart from society. And she was used to moving in the highest social circles that valued beauty and sophistication and did not want the woman with half her face shot off to come to supper.
Yeah. Oh, that's so heartbreaking. Oh, wow. So that is the story of Griffith Jenkins Griffith and Griffith Park. And is the son still alive?
I think there's still a Griffith Family Trust that has a say in the affairs of the park. If you go to the Friends of the Griffith Park website, you can find all the details of the Griffith Trust there, and they take a sort of active interest in the custody of the park.
But it is a beautiful place that's free for everyone to enjoy and hike through and bike through and ride your horses through. The observatory, the Greek theater, all that stuff is so gorgeous. And it's very heartening that it will never be built on. There is a whole legacy, though, of a lot of terrible things happening in Griffith Park and around Los Feliz. We could do a whole episode just a long list of the disasters, the murders, the deaths, the suicides that have been.
Yeah, I think because it is this free space, it's where people go to do the things that they don't want civilized human beings watching them do. Whether it's cruising, jumping a body, ending your days, setting fires, all kinds of terrible things have happened up there.
And it's a lot of land, and it's been around for a long time. And so a lot of bad things can happen. It might not be a curse. It might just be that's what happens when you have a lot of land.
Yeah. And I think it happens when humans interact with the landscape like that. I think we are an awful species. And you give us unsupervised wilderness and we will do wild things.
It's been so wonderful having you on the show. I can't thank you enough for sharing this whole amazing story with so many more details than I had anticipated. I've learned so much from you. I have this whole story of Griffith Jenkins Griffith in my head now forever. So thank you so much. As we wrap things up, what are you working on and where can people find you?
Well, as of tomorrow morning, I'm technically unemployed, which is, I just finished a writing assignment, so I'm not quite sure what comes next. You can find me on Substack. My Substack is called The Haunted Path, and I'm publishing a series of articles on there, as I say, on Hollywood, plus various other things. I have a KarinaWilson.com if you want to get in touch with me for any reason, and you can also find me on Blue Sky, which is my only social media these days.
Good for you. And you can find Haunted Hollywood Hour on Instagram at Haunted Hollywood Hour, all one word. I really do need to make a Blue Sky for Haunted Hollywood Hour because I think that is the place to be right now. And so I will be working on doing that. And you can find, of course, this podcast anywhere you get your podcasts. But be sure to give us a little rating and a review, a comment if you like it, because those comments help other listeners find the podcast. And if you have an idea for a show, if you want to be on an episode, if you have something that you want us to talk about, send it to hauntedhollywoodhour@gmail.com. And I'd love to hear it. Until next time, bye.